Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Fischl, making a build guide, talking about her, looking at her entire kit, and then looking over at how to build her with different artifacts, weapons, and then best teams as well, just looking at how good of a character she actually is. Now the biggest thing I want to keep in mind when we look at Fischl, obviously there is a way that you can play her on field, but the way I'm going to be talking about her today is the way that I think most, if not all, players in the game play her as, which is going to be a sub DPS, usually throwing her off field, and that allows her to be thrown into a lot more teams, and it makes her an extremely solid option to throw with so many different teams, and therefore being a very solid option for a sub DPS for a lot of different teams, giving you more characters to use. So I do think that putting her off field is the best way to go. So without further ado, looking at the banners really quickly, we talked about the 2 5-stars already, and obviously with the Christmas break, I hope that you guys all had a great time. I did as well. If you guys celebrated during the holidays, whether that be Christmas or during the New Year's or whatever, hope you guys stay safe, and also looking forward to the new year that's coming up. But without further ado, once again, let's go ahead and jump right into Fischl as a character. Now, like I said, the first thing that she's going to be focusing on is going to be that off-field damage. Now, she is an off-field sub DPS type character, so the normal attack talent that you use is not going to be very useful, at least the way that I'm going to be talking about her. Now, yes, you can actually make it go pretty well in the way that I'm saying that making her do on-field damage, her personal weapon, or maybe the weapon that mirrors how she is as a character, is a physical damage bonus weapon, and that is a bow that, you know, kind of fits her aesthetic. That can be used on her, and that's the kind of very few people who play her as a damage dealer on field. But she can be a very strong damage dealer by using damage off field as well. Now, obviously, you can have that off field damage happening while she is on field, but mainly people are using other damage dealers that just have a higher level to actually do the damage. Her on field damage is not personally my favorite, nor do I think most people's favorite, but that is something to keep in mind. If you guys do want to use her normal attacks or any of her charge attacks or whatever to get some either regular physical damage off or regular just actual electro hits, then you are going to want to level into the normal attack talent. But for me, I'm going to say for most people, this is not a necessity or even really to touch much at all. Now, looking at the skill, she's going to summon Oz. She has a crow, or a talking crow. If you guys have played the story enough, you've probably seen Oz here and there. That is going to be her off-field damage hitting raven. Now, it states that she summons Oz, and the night raven forged of darkness and lightning descends upon the land, dealing electro damage in a small AoE. So that is just the initial damage hit that he uses. For the ability's duration, Oz will continuously attack nearby opponents with free Kugel. Now, basically, that is just going to be that extra damage hit that he's going to be doing. So the summoning damage is going to be the initial damage hit that I was talking about, and then the consistent damage is going to be that first number that you see there. The duration is for 10 seconds, and you do have a cooldown of 25 seconds, but we'll talk about this in a minute where that actually comes in, where you can kind of push that time limit a little bit longer. The rest of this states that hold the skill to then adjust the location that Oz will be summoned to, and then press again anytime during the ability's duration to once again summon him to Fischl's side. So if he's a little bit farther away and you want to kind of bring him closer to you while his duration is still going, you can press the skill again, bringing him closer with the duration still in effect. So that is kind of how the skill works, pretty quick and pretty simple, especially with these 1.0 or beginning characters at the very least. A lot of these characters have very simple kits, which is very easy to understand and also very easy to use. Now, looking at the burst, you will summon Oz to spread his twin wings of Twilight and defend Fischl. Has the following properties during the ability's duration. Fischl takes on Oz's form, greatly increasing her movement speed. Basically, you will turn into Oz for like for a few seconds at least while you're doing this. You will strike nearby opponents with lightning, so you're basically going to be forced to move, and you're just going to move in the direction that you actually want to go, but you'll always be going forward, and you'll just obviously turn left and right on how you actually want to hit opponents, usually trying to knock into opponents so that you can deal electro damage to them. You will then deal electro damage to opponents she comes into contact with, and each opponent can only be struck one time during this ability though. Once this ability's effects end, Oz will remain on the battlefield and attack his princess's foes. So It's basically working like the skill after you use the burst. Once you get that initial damage hits off when you are kind of in that bird mode, then he'll basically do what the skill did and put Oz right to your side again. If Oz is already on the field, then this will reset the duration of his presence. So there you go, already to show you how to use it, is that with the skill, let's say you do your skill, and let's say the 10 seconds is up, but you have another 15 seconds of downtime before you can use the skill again, because you have a 15 second, kind of like wait period before the cooldown is ready to come back. So usually people will then use their burst or they'll use their burst initially. It kind of just depends, using skill or burst first, and then using the other once that duration is over. And so you can get a solid 20 seconds of Oz out on the field. And if you have enough energy recharge, you can obviously pretty easily actually get the burst back on rotation by, just having every 15 seconds using your burst. And that's what a lot of people will usually do. If not, they'll just immediately throw out a skill if they need it within the 10-second mark. So that's usually how she is played specifically. And she also has a very low energy cost considering that she is an electro character. Usually we've seen with electro characters they have a higher energy cost. This allows you to really go more into personal damage and allow her to do good amount of damage without having to worry so much about the energy recharge she would need. So let's go ahead and look at the first passive talent. When Fischl hits Oz with a fully charged aim shot, Oz brings down Thundering Retribution, dealing AoE electro damage equal to 152.7% of the arrow's damage. So if you basically hit your bird is then going to do a bigger damage hit. Looking at the second passive talent after that, if your current active character triggers an electro-related elemental reaction when Oz is on the field, the opponent shall be stricken with Thundering Retribution that deals electro damage equal to 80% of Fischl's attack. So any type of electro-related elemental reaction will then have when Oz is actually on the field. So if he is on the field and the current active character, let's say that they are Neuvillette in this instance, just because Neuvillette's a pretty solid kind of combo teammate with Fischl in my opinion. If Oz throws, let's say, Electro on the enemy, then Neuvillette puts Hydro on the enemy, then you're going to have that electro-charged effect happening. When that reaction is actually created, the opponent will then be stricken with the Thundering Retribution that it talks about here, doing a bunch of extra damage equal to 80% of Fischl's attack. So you're getting some extra damage hit when you are able to do some of those extra reactions based on what you do with Fischl as a character. I just want you guys to keep in mind, though, that this can work for aggravate teams. So if you are seeing that aggravate hit a lot, which is when you have Electro and Dendro come together, create Quicken, and if you put Electro on top of that, that is going to create, obviously because that is an Electro-related reaction, that is going to be worth in using this Thundering Retribution. But keep in mind that spread teams don't actually trigger this effect, which is when you put Dendro on a Quicken reaction, because technically there it is a Dendro-related reaction rather than not. So that is the only thing, is that this passive doesn't trigger when spread reactions occur, so her damage output could kind of be a little bit lower when you're actually looking in that team comp a little bit more. So keep that in mind as you are thinking about Fischl and using her. Aggravate teams, it works. Spread teams, not so much. Every other type of team, though, that has an electro-related reaction happening in it, this will happen. Next, let's go ahead and talk about her weapons. Now, there's a bunch of different weapons that I think can really work with Fischl. I think it heavily depends on what you want to do, though. The biggest thing with Fischl is obviously focusing on some sort of crit or some sort of attack. And so as you can see here, I am running Rust. So there's plenty of different options really specifically with her to really run. She ascends into attack, so if you really want to make sure that she has a solid crit, then you can focus a lot more on, maybe a little bit more on crit for the weapon, and therefore focusing a little bit more on other things as well. But honestly, there are some pretty good weapons that she could use. When we talk about 5 stars, there is 2 major ways that we talk about building her. And the first way is an off-field DPS, or like a sub-DPS like I was talking about, having her kind of do a lot of good damage from off-field while having your main damage dealer on-field doing the most damage. She's a solid sub-DPS. The other way to build her is going to be like an aggravate DPS. There are 2 separate different ways to build that, because one's going to have a lot more EM and the other one is just like this, is going to have a little bit more focus on some other things. So the first idea of the few weapons that I think, especially talking about 5 stars that she can use, things that are going to be pretty solid for her are things like Polar Star, Aqua Simulacra, Skyward Harp, and Thundering Pulse. Polar Star, Aqua are really mainly there just because they do a lot of crit. So you have something like Aqua Simulacra, that is purely a stat stick in my personal opinion. Polar Star, on the other hand, it is a crit rate main stat, but it also does increase your elemental skill and burst damage, which is the major way that she does a lot of her damage. So that is kind of something to keep in mind. And then after you do some hits, you're going to get even more attack increases based off the ability on the weapon. So Polar Star is actually a really, really solid option if you are just trying to get Fischl in general to be a better character. Something like Aqua Simulacra, like I stated though, it kind of does depend. You do get a damage buff, but mainly it's just the main stat that a lot of people care about here. Aqua Simulacra is a really just solid weapon overall. Skyward Harp is a crit rate main stat weapon. You'll get some crit damage in the ability as well, so you kind of get that best of both worlds of both crits in one singular weapon, which is why Skyward Harp is always a solid option to throw on any type of damage dealer. Thundering Pulse is a little bit of a different weapon. This is a crit damage main stat weapon, not as high as Aqua Simulacra, but instead of getting a lot of HP buffs or whatever, because Aqua Simulacra is in, focusing a little bit more on her personal character, which is going to be Yelan. Instead, you have something like Thundering Pulse, which is Yoimiya's weapon, and Yoimiya is very similar or more similar to what Fischl is, considering they both do damage through attack. Now, with this, though, and with this weapon, you're going to have to focus a little bit more by using your skill. That'll give you a stack of something to increase some damage, but you'll also get some, normal attack damage increases based through this, but it does give an attack buff, so it is pretty solid weapon, but I think that overall, these are mainly just stat stick weapons. Things like Hunter's Path, even something like Amos's Bow I have here is also going to be good. It's really just a stat stick type weapon rather than actually looking at the ability that can be used for her. Now, other weapons that you can use is something like Alley Hunter. Alley Hunter is a pretty good weapon because at level 90 you get 27.6% attack at 565 base attack. A little bit different than the weapon that I'm using right here. A lower base attack and a lower amount of attack percent, but the reason that Alley Hunter kind of flashes is because of its ability. Now at R1 with Alley Hunter, while the character equipped with this weapon is in the party but not on the field, their damage increases by 2% every second to a maximum of 20%. Now if you remember, Oz is happening for 10 seconds, meaning he can until the very end get a maximum buff through this. And when the character is on the field more than 4 seconds, the aforementioned damage buff decreases by 4% per second until it reaches 0. Now, the great thing about this, obviously, it's pretty easy or easier to maybe get more refinements on this weapon, but you do have less amount of attack, but you do have a higher base attack, so it kind of just depends on what you really want. But the great thing about this is going to be that ability, and over time, almost have like a Yelan buff, where Yelan has a passive that slowly increases damage to the on-field character. Here, when you are off-field longer with Fischl, the longer she's off-field, the more damage she's going to do with Oz. Also keep in mind that when you use this weapon though, try not to keep her on the field for very long. As you could see in the ability, it states that they're going to only want to have her on field for like a maximum of 4 seconds before it starts to have some diminishing returns and start to actually take away from that damage buff you just created. Another weapon that you could use is Viridescent Hunt. Viridescent Hunt, crit stat weapon, obviously crit rate is pretty good. You do have some normal attacks and whatnot that are kind of in the ability that do some extra damage, but you don't really care about that. It's really more of a stat stick here, this weapon, and it is going to be the battle pass weapon. Same thing with Sign of the Blazing Sun. You can use it, not really a fan in my personal opinion. You really just care about the main stat with these weapons, but another solid weapon that I think is really, really good, and I would probably put this on my Fischl if it wasn't for Yelan, is going to be Fading Twilight. Fading Twilight is a really strong weapon on Yelan as well, but it's an energy recharge main stat weapon, which you don't really care too much about with Fischl, but it can work extremely well. You do get some extra damage increases when you hit opponents with the weapon, which will switch to each state. So after you hit a weapon after 3 times, you're going to get to this maximum of 28% damage. And this weapon can change states every 7 seconds. So it's about a 21-second kind of area of kind of cooldown. So you might want to do like a normal attack and then throw out your skill. And then when your skill is done, put her back on field, do her burst. Halfway through or so through her burst, you're going to get, or a little bit later, you're probably going to get this 28% damage increase. If not, you'll be sitting at 20%. A pretty solid weapon overall, though, especially if you have it at R5 through one of the events that we had back in the day. Now, a weapon you could use also is something like the Stringless, just for the elemental skill and burst damage buff. Yes, with the other aggravate teams, though, that's what we're going to talk about now. Obviously, the weapon I'm using, Rust, is going to be a pretty solid weapon. Once again, the attack percent as the main stat. But that's really just the sub-DPS version of her, or the non-aggravate team version of her. Any of the 5 stars I talked about, if you're talking about aggravate Fischl, can work. So if you have, let's say, Al-Haytham, Yaimiko, Fischl, and Nahida, or let's say Nahida, Fischl, and Baiju with Alhaitham as the driver. Either way, you're having this aggravate type of team or even a spread type of team. If you put her on the field, she's going to be doing that damage. So if you kind of have that, any of the 5 stars I previously mentioned are going to be good options. Stringless is probably going to be the best 4-star option, though, if you are going for the aggravate type way. Getting a lot of elemental mastery and a lot of the other stats you get in your artifacts can make up for the attack and the crit that you're losing, but also the elemental skill, elemental burst damage here is going to be extremely helpful. The more refinements you get, the better. Now, also, because aggravate is still based not only on elemental mastery, but also crit, as well as, there is some pretty good, usages there, then technically Viridescent Hunt is also a pretty good option, as well as Sign of the Blazing Sun, but still, I think Viridescent Hunt's probably just better overall. Alley Hunter also works, but once again, I think Stringless sits at the top really for that aggravate team. The EM is extremely strong, and there are some really good abilities as well in it. Now, something like the Windbloom Ode could also be used. After you use a skill, you'll receive basically a buff that increases attack for 16% for 6 seconds, and it's an EM main stat weapon. So between Stringless and the Windbloom Ode, if you have higher refinements on either one, use the one that has the higher refinement or the one that's leveled. That's going to be your better weapon, specifically when we talk about the aggravate DPS for the 4 stars. Now, for the other side, when you're just talking about an overall Fischl, the one that can just kind of do everything, I think one of the best weapons, you have something like Viridescent Hunt. Alley Hunter is going to be an extremely strong weapon, and something like Rust is also, in my personal opinion, a very strong weapon as well, just because of the high amount of attack. Now, I know that's not necessarily a very good opinion, maybe that a lot of people may have, but I still do think that Rust has a lot of strong ability to be used for this character. Now let's go ahead and talk about artifacts pretty quickly, because honestly, there's not really much to talk about. In my personal opinion, the best set for her is going to be the 4-piece Golden Troop. You get a bunch of elemental skill damage on both the 2-piece and the 4-piece, and when you're not on the field, you're doing even more elemental skill damage. In my personal opinion, I think that's the best, and I'm glad to see that over time we've slowly started to change from things like the 4-piece Thundering Fury and the 2-piece Glad and the 2-piece Thundering Fury. These are great sets, but obviously I do think that the 4-piece Golden Troop is extremely strong. Now, another 4-piece, obviously you can see here, is the Thundering Fury. You could also use this as well. The 2-piece gives electro damage bonus, very solid, but the 4-piece increasing the overload, electro-charged, superconduct, basically different types of actual regular damage that you're going to be doing with electro, and then also aggravate damage is increased by 20%, and then when quicken or aforementioned elemental reactions are triggered, any of those electro related reactions are triggered, elemental skill cooldown is decreased by 1 second and can occur once every 0.8 seconds, giving your skill back a lot quicker. And that's really, really good for her, because 4-piece Thundering Fury did give her skill back consistently. The thing with Fischl, though, is the whole point of her is to use her burst alongside of her skill, so you can double the amount of time that Oz is on the field, not having to worry about your skill as much. She kind of almost fixes it with her kit rather than needing this 4-piece. Before this 4-piece, before we had Golden Troop, the 4-piece Thundering Fury was still extremely strong, and it was very comfortable. But now that we know that she already had in her kit, she already kind of fixes the issue that this kind of 4-piece weapon set brings up. Now that we have something really strong like the 4-piece Golden Troop, we can push Thundering Fury to the side. Both of these sets are going to work extremely well. Obviously, this is one of her older, better sets, so if you use 4-piece Thundering Fury, don't think that it's absolutely trash. Just know that in my personal opinion, I do think that the 4-piece Golden Troop is just better. Now, you do have the combos that you can use between any 2-piece attack sets, as well as any of the 2-piece electro damage bonus sets, and even throwing in a 2-piece Golden Troop as well. So as you're getting ready for maybe grinding one of these 2 sets, or if let's say you're getting ready to grind Golden Troop because you're just trying to get better pieces, if you run a 2-piece Golden Troop with a 2-piece attack, or any 2-piece attack sets, any electro damage bonus sets, and any elemental skill damage bonus sets, those are going to be the best for you. So things like Golden Troop, things like Gladiator's Finale, any of those attack percent sets. So things like Fragment, things like Gladiator's Finale, like I talked about. Unfinished Reverie is another one. A lot of those newer sets, but don't kind of keep in mind that there are other attack percent sets as well down here that can be used, like Shimanama's Reminiscence. So there's plenty of different options to really use there, and then obviously the electro damage bonus sets aren't terrible either. When we look at main stats on the character, though, when you are looking at a Fischl that is focused mainly through aggravate, you're going to want to do an EM Sans. If you already have an EM weapon, you can try to go for an attack percent Sans, but I still think that probably EM is just going to be better either way. If you are going for just a base Fischl that can just kind of do everything, still go for the attack percent sans. She can still work in those aggravate teams, and she can still do pretty good aggravate damage. It'll just be kind of dependent on how much EM you can get in the abilities and whatnot and the substats as you kind of build her here and there based on what she has. So that is really with the sans. It's either attack percent for kind of anything and everything for, you know, her just being a pretty basic character that just works on everything, or if you want to hyper focus into the EM with, you know, aggravate, you can do the EM sans. Looking at the goblet, most of the time you're going to be running an electro damage bonus. Yes, you can run EM if you are running, you know, attack percent over here and you want to run an EM goblet because of the aggravate team, sure. But do not do double EM on any of these pieces. If you are doing the aggravate team, just go with attack percent on one and go with EM on the other. Do not double up on EM. It really doesn't work out most of the time. So electro damage bonus is mainly the one that you're going for the goblet. If you have to run an attack percent goblet, that also works pretty well, but the electro damage bonus is just kind of the major way to go with her. Now, if you are going the physical damage bonus route or the physical route, then physical damage bonus also works here, but once again, I didn't really talk about it too much, so I didn't really want to bring it up too heavily, but I did want to just kind of slot that in there. When you are looking at the circlet, then the next thing to keep in mind is crit ratio. Don't run an EM circlet here. Do not run an attack percent. With Fischl, trying to make sure you have a solid, somewhat good crit ratio is probably going to be best. And honestly, it's not terrible to really notice that she has a pretty quote-unquote bad crit ratio, especially if you don't have a crit weapon. If you have one of those crit weapons, your ratio is going to be absolutely insane. But as you see, as I'm not running any, crit weapon, the only crit that I'm getting is from artifacts. She ascends into attack, so that is kind of where I'm running a lot with her. As well as if you have any abilities or whatnot that also increase crit rate, you can also work with that as well. But usually trying to have a 1-for-2 or something like that crit ratio is going to be pretty solid for you. I would say try to get to 50-60% with her. She hits kind of pretty consistently. So it kind of just depends a little bit on her critting. But honestly, once again, she's a sub DPS. You're not focusing too much on her being perfect. But if you want to, you can. But most of the time, you're just trying to make sure that she's doing good damage. So things like attack are going to be very, very good alongside of the crit rate and crit damage for the character. Now let's go to talk about Constellations. Now with her as a character, she obviously is a 4-star, and we did the same thing with Hazo. The Constellations with the 5 stars, I do talk about in the sense of should you go for them. But with 4 stars, you almost never want to go for Constellations. If you can pick them up, that's great. And I'm just going to go through really what these Constellations do so that you know what you're doing with the Constellations. Besides that, though, with 4 stars, you never really want to chase any of the Constellations. You rather just get them over time. With the first constellation, it states that even when Oz is not present in combat, he can still watch over Fischl through his raven eyes. When Fischl performs a normal attack against an opponent, Oz fires a coordinated attack dealing damage equal to 22% of Fischl's attack. So if you can find a way that you know what, I really like the C1 and I want to run the physical damage bonus route, I really want to run her in the damage way on field, then you can technically switch up your build a little bit and go with the C1. My personal opinion, even at C6, I think that it's just better to run the other way and just keep going with the skill and burst damage way, keeping her off field. Looking at the C2, it states that when Knight Rider is used, or her skill, it deals an additional 200% of attack as damage, and its AoE is increased by 50%. Not gonna lie, because Oz does not move, this is extremely helpful because obviously, once again, if he's too far away, he kind of just sits in place and then attacks. The AoE increase is absolutely insane. So this is a very good constellation. Be happy that you caught it kind of idea. The C3 increases the level of the skill by 3, and the C5 increases the level of the burst by 3. Now, the C4 states that when the burst is used, it deals 220% of attack as electro damage to surrounding opponents. Very, very good constellation, obviously, because once again, you're using your skill and your burst consistently in tandem together. Because the whole point is using your skill, having 10 seconds of Oz, using your burst, doing a bunch of damage in the burst phase, but also then putting Oz out on field again for another 20 seconds. And by that time, you have about 5 seconds to wait to use the skill again, and now you have a pretty solid rotation. At least for the skill to be used again, and if your burst is ready before, Oz is gone on that burst use, that is also pretty solid. You usually see a lot of people use the burst first rather than the skill, because if you use the burst, you're going to use up all your energy and then have 10 seconds of Oz. And then once Oz is done for 10 seconds, you're going to be using your skill. over this period of time of 20 seconds now, when your burst was used at the beginning, now you have 20 full seconds of getting energy for only 60 energy cost of her. So by the time the second 10 seconds is done, or the full 20 seconds of using your skill for the second 10 seconds, you're then going to have you're going to have basically that energy back to use your burst again and rinse and repeat. So burst then skill, burst then skill, burst then skill. That's usually how people, start with burst then skill. So that's kind of the idea. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. If it was, I'm sorry, but basically you want to start with your burst, go to your skill, and that's basically how it's going to be going, and then just rinse, repeat. Do your burst right after your skill that you use it. When the skill duration ends, though, Fischl regenerates 20% of her HP. If she is kind of getting hit during this phase, this can be pretty helpful for her. Or if she's just on low HP, this can be pretty helpful. It is 20% of her HP. It is based on her HP, so just keep that in mind. It's a pretty nice jump if she is a little bit lower. You're usually focusing on trying to heal your main DPS because they're usually taking the brunt of the attacks. So unless you have a shielder, if you have a healer in the team, this is actually a pretty solid constellation to have as well. Just that extra little bit of help. The 6th constellation states that it extends the duration of Oz's presence on the field by 2 seconds. So now instead of 10 seconds, you're now running for 12 seconds. Now keep that in mind, that is your both skill, and after you're done with the burst, it also throws out Oz, which is now 12 seconds as well. So that's 24 seconds. And the cooldown on the skill is 25 seconds. So it's only 1 second downtime. Very, very solid kind of use there. And that even means that while you're running through using your burst, you can run burst then skill, and this constellation isn't even necessary at that point, but it does mean 2 seconds more of damage. Additionally, Oz performs coordinated attacks with your active character when present, dealing 30% of Fischl's attack as electro damage. Now this is more consistent than the damage that he does normally, so having Oz attack even more often is absolutely insane, because now you're having coordinated attacks with the active character, having more damage be put out. Now this could allow for more reactions for more characters, but it could also just mean straight up more damage for your entire team, and could possibly, make the difference for certain clears, depending on what you need in the Abyss or whatnot, as well as the Imaginarium Theater, wherever you really use her. Overall, I've already stated it 5,000 times, she works in so many different teams. Any type of electro-related reaction team, you saw her kit, she's going to work the best in those teams. And one of my favorite teams that she's probably put in is going to be some sort of Neuvillette team. So putting Neuvillette with her is going to be really, really fun, especially if you have a C1 Neuvillette. You only need 2 characters to create reactions for him to get one of his maximum buffs. But if you do only have a C0 Neuvillette, things like another Pyro character. But the whole point of her is to just, be a really, really solid damage dealer, but also create reactions for the entire party setup. So I think overall that is a pretty solid team. If I was using her, I think I used her in the past with this type of team. It is a spread team, so her 4th passive doesn't actually, or 2nd passive doesn't actually trigger, but that does mean, we call it an A4 passive, it just means her 4th ascension passive. Basically though, you do have the double electro going on here. Yaimiko is basically just a 5-star version of what Fischl does, but they are both extremely strong characters. Fischl is still a very, very good character and can be useful in a lot of different teams, but this team is probably one of my more favorites, just because even though this is a spread team, you still do have aggravate somewhat going on with like Yaimiko and whatnot. So as long as, Fischl is aggravating, you can still get some pretty solid damage out there. But either way, her damage is her damage, and she's still going to be helping the team. And even here, she's making sure that she has the Electro Resonance, which is giving energy back to someone like Alhaitham, who usually focuses so much into attack, EM, and double crit, that you are almost never going to find an Alhaitham with a pretty good amount of energy recharge. So having a team like this can actually be pretty helpful. And if you switch out someone like Yaimiko for Nahida, for instance, to make the team even better, Fischl can still be a really, really solid slot to have in the team to create the spread for, or the quicken for then Alhaitham to spread, allowing him to do more damage. So she can be a buffer for herself to obviously use this team to aggravate, but she can also use the team to obviously be a solid buffer to a DPS. So she's a very strong character, once again, like I've stated over 1,000 times. It's just a very good character to use. If you, for some odd reason, have Eula and you really, really like Eula, Eula pairs pretty well with Fischl as well. Eula likes Superconduct because that reaction is going to help her do more physical damage, and Fischl is constantly having that Electro having it applied. And so whenever Eula needs to apply Superconduct to an enemy, she has her own personal cryo that she can use, and it allows a lot of Superconduct consistent consistent damage as well. But the idea isn't even the superconduct there, it's just creating the reaction for Eula to do more damage, and it also means that Fischl can technically also get a lot out of it as well. Because if you want to use her as a physical damage dealer, you would just use her there and use an off-field cryo for her to do personal damage with physical hits. But this also means that Fischl is also a pretty solid, strength for the team, because she doesn't necessarily need reactions to do a lot of damage, and because of kind of how superconduct teams work, you're not focusing on big reaction damage, you're focusing on just doing superconduct. So having characters like Fischl to help the overall team that don't need reactions to just do solid damage is actually pretty good for the team. So Fischl is a fairly strong character there. Another character you could use her with is someone like, obviously someone like Wanderer. Honestly, anything that she can react with, the better. Any of those elemental reactions you saw in her kit, the better. Obviously helping him maybe stay up or get some extra energy based on one of his passives. Even someone like Navia can also use her. The consistent application is going to be pretty helpful because these characters kind of help her crystallize. So characters like Fischl have the consistent off-field electro damage that allow Navia to crystallize. Pyro characters, consistent appliers of any of the core 4 are going to help Navia crystallize, therefore allowing Navia to do more damage. Just another way that Fischl is helping herself as well as the team to do more damage. Now Fischl here isn't really getting a solid buff usually, unless you throw Farina in the team, which can definitely work. But usually, with this type of team, Fischl is kind of the extra slotted in character to just make sure that you're crystallizing as much as possible, making sure Navia can use the bigger damage hits that she does in her skill. There are plenty of other characters that Fischl can work with. If you want to run some sort of overload team, that also works pretty well. If you have like a pyro character like Arlecchino, and you're thinking, I want to put, Arlecchino, I want to put these 3 characters, and you need an off-field electro character to just make sure that you're overloading, because these 3 are pyro characters, you need at least one of them to be electro to overload, then Fischl can be a pretty solid character. Yes, Yaemiko works, and yes, she probably can in certain instances do more damage, but Fischl, even at C6, can be a really, really strong character. Even at E0, she's a strong character as well. So there's so many different teams that I think can work with her that it's really just kind of almost endless. She works in a lot of different teams, she works in a lot of good teams, and works with some of the best DPS in the game I've already showed. She works with Navia, she works with Neuvillette, she works with Arlecchino, she works with Alhaitham. Some of the best DPS that the game have to offer, Fischl can be in some of those teams, if not almost all of them. So I think that there is a really strong opinion on Fischl actually being a very, very good character, even though she is a more early game character.
Phantasmagoria. Hear the echoes of the valley. Let the fighter be humble.
Your coming was foretold. Dance with me. For the eternal oasis.
The shadows are let the mountains face boil. The curtain. The eternal oasis of long last.
Right here. Emerge. Right here. Wings of darkness. Come. Sever neck.
Taking a turn for the better.
Scatter.
Here you are.
Emerge. Right here. I'm always watching. Right now. Right here.
Mind the side effect.
Midnight Phantasmagoria. Midnight Phantasmagoria. Stop right there. Everybody stand.
Everlasting as the moon. Transfixed.
By royal decree.
Let's light it. Hands run and see 'em. Teamwork is strict.
Well, that's everything I've got talking about Fischl overall as a character. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like, subscribe. Let me know how you guys use your Fischl. Did you guys kind of focus on the aggravate way? Did you kind of just put her together in the most normal way, the kind of way I did? Do you guys use 4-piece golden troop like most other people? Do you guys run a different set, maybe a 2-piece to just maximize her attack buffs or whatnot? Do you guys, like her as a character? Do you guys feel like she has a really, really solid character overall as like an actual usage rate? I think that she's a very easy to use character, so it's very difficult to say that it's difficult to use her. I think that overall she has a really, really good damage, and she's an early game character, and it just goes to show that these characters can still hold up to what's happening now in the game. And honestly, with her putting on most of the characters that are in the top multiple DPS teams, I think that Fischl can still be a really, really strong character for most people's accounts. So no matter who you have here, Fischl is a very, very solid option to actually make you rise to the top of the game as well. Also, go ahead and check out any of the other videos I've made over other build guides. I'm going to try to be putting those up tomorrow. We're going to be doing a Yao Yao build guide before the banners switch, and then we'll be talking about Mavuika and Sitlali, which hopefully I'll be getting both of them. And if you guys are pulling as well, Happy New Year's, but also good luck on your pulls. Thank you guys for watching the video though, and I'll see you guys in the next one.